So I'm Michelle Allen, and I'm going to be presenting to you today a bit on the experiences of Padres Informados, Jóvenes Preparados, as we explore power, trust, and conflict over the life cycle of partnership development. So I am doing this presentation alone today because my partner in crime, Veronica Svetas, is not feeling well. She will be participating in the webinar and our future conversations. So because Veronica's not here today, I'm going to give you a little bit of a taste of our partnership. I'm going to talk about our partnership development and just explore a little bit some of our issues of trust development, relationship building, and some examples of conflict that we've had over the life cycle of our own partnership. But really, because Veronica's not able to be with us, I'm going to save a lot of that in-depth conversation for our webinar. So we're going to be talking, first of all, about the foundations of community-based participatory research partnerships. So I know that you all have had a lot of introduction on participatory research. You're well into your own partnerships. We wanted to share that for our partnership, we base it on the principles and the definition of participatory research that Barbara Israel and her community partners have developed. And then we use a definition of community that tries to acknowledge the multiple identities that each of us represent as community members in various sorts of communities. And in our participatory work, really rely on community to self-define. So we allow the communities that we're working with to self-define what community means to them and what community identities they're bringing to the partnership work. And from our perspectives, there's a couple of reasons why we do participatory research. So from a community perspective, and this would typically be what Veronica would present, participatory research is a means to address a self-defined concern, health issue, or problem within the community. There's an understanding that participating in research can bring new resources into communities, and most importantly, it brings community voices into dialogues where they might not otherwise be heard. And from the researcher perspective, we really come from the place that community voice and community involvement produces more appropriate, more relevant, and likely more sustainable interventions and programs. And so it really is a key part of addressing some of our translational science challenges. So we want to make sure that programs not only are scientifically sound and valid, but that they're used in the future. So from our perspective, having communities involved will make that process of translating into uptake and sustainability in the real world more likely to be successful. But probably most importantly to us, we see participatory research as a social justice enterprise. So this is something that Veronica really emphasizes in talking about the rationale from the community perspective to doing this work. So when we're doing participatory research, we're often working with communities who are the most marginalized, the most affected negatively by social determinants of health. And being part of a participatory research process generates voice, again, allows for a seat at the table, really allows for a new opportunity for discussions and a new way of doing research that avoids some of the practices we've had in the past that really tend to be disempowering. It acknowledges that history, works with that history, and actively tries to create a different set of interactions that are going to lead to more egalitarian and more effective relationships, and that particularly center on community voice. So, as I'm sure you all have experienced and we all know, participatory research really relies on trust, shared decision-making, and sharing power. But those things don't happen naturally, particularly within our existing social structures that often promote inequalities. So, for instance, challenges to developing trust include a litany of bad experiences that community organizations have had with researchers, the more egregious historical and recent injustices and racism in research that research has perpetuated, and a lack of understanding of other partners' priorities. We come to this work from different places, and if we're not very clear about what those priorities are, we're at risk for undermining the partnership. The practical processes of bringing partners in after a project is funded, which is sort of what we do often in research without really thinking about it, certainly undermines trust. And that day-to-day sort of stating that we mean what we say, we're going to really show with our actions that our principles are a part of our day-to-day work practices. So decision-making collaboratively across partners can be challenging. So partners coming from academia and coming from the quote-unquote real world have different goals. We have different values. We have different priorities. Our organizations are driving us towards different types of work. The cultures have different timelines, different expectations for action. And if we don't have a clear process for making decisions and understanding when we've come to a decision, that can undermine our partnership. And then there's all of the power differences that exist out there in our society that we bring into our partnerships. There are structural inequalities like racism, sexism, ageism. There's issues of control of resources. Academics are typically quite used to controlling budgets, making decisions about budgets across research projects. And then there's a lack of understanding of how we respect and value and show the value for all the partners around the table. So those challenges may lead to conflict. So a lot of these things that we've talked about really can lead to direct conflict or sometimes to indirect conflict where people sort of vote with their feet and just sort of stop participating in a partnership or partnership activities. So unless we're very attentive to these processes at various stages of the partnership lifestyle, we're at risk for having conflict that could potentially seriously undermine the partnership. Or within a given set of circumstances where we've built solid partnerships, conflict can actually be a positive thing. So conflict can lead to growth in the partnership, strength of understanding within the partnership. And if, in our experience, conflict can often comes at tension points around control between the academic and community partners, and can sometimes result in strengthening community's role in the project. So how do these different factors play out over time, and how can we anticipate them? How can we be prepared to build the partnership pieces that are important to these long-term relationships and make conflict a normal, healthy part of partnership development? So the literature really describes partnership development in terms of research stages, but there's not been a lot of work understanding how group interactions change and develop over a long-term partnership. So because we both work with adolescents and the different aspects of our job, development was a natural metaphor for us. So those of you who have a psychology background or took Psychology 101 may remember Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. So this is a model of individual development. At each of the 8 stages, individuals must complete a developmental task in order to move smoothly to the next stage. And if these foundational tasks are achieved, then that's a smooth and natural process. If those tasks are not achieved, that can lead to conflict. In Erikson's model, it's internal conflict that may sort of keep an individual from maturing in a healthy way. So this sort of metaphor works because partnerships really are living entities. They have a growth sort of unto themselves. It doesn't work in the sense that partnership development is not linear. It's often circular and iterative. So just to remind you, Erikson's stages are from infancy through later life, and the tasks at each of those stages are listed here. As we thought about how this applied to partnership development, we kept the developmental stage that we're familiar with because in a metaphorical sense, it really does seem to work for partnership development. So this is our graphic representation, and we presented it as a pyramid because really we do see these things as foundational that build on each other. So infancy of a partnership is about developing trust, security, optimism about the partnership and what it can do. So it's that stage of hope. The toddler stage is about building respect for individuals within the partnership and sort of navigating that organizational autonomy and each person's kind of goals and priorities within the partnership and establishing how the partners work together. The preschool stage is about broadening skills through projects and learning about building cooperation, right? Which fits for toddlers and really sort of fits at this stage, works for preschoolers and really works at this stage for partnership development as well. So school age is about increasing competence in performance and project activities, formalizing teamwork. And then adolescence, our favorite stage, is about developing a partnership identity and a set of ideas on which to base future work. And young adulthood is about solidifying the bond within a growing partnership. Adulthood about expanding that creativity, sharing lessons learned. And then maturity is about appreciating achievements and sharing those with others. So let me step back and tell you a little bit about our Padres Informados Jóvenes Preparados program. So this is the project that Veronica and I have been working together on. The aim is to prevent tobacco and other substance use among Latino youth by engaging families in culturally and linguistically appropriate family skills development. So our partnership is 11 years old. We've really adhered to those CBPR principles by collaboratively developing and testing the Padres Informados curriculum over a number of grants and stages of the development of the research. We've really done a lot of training and presentation and reflecting on our partnership and how that supported our work. And really how we have worked together has evolved across time and across grants. So I just want to mention, you'll see a number of different pictures of partners. You'll see that they change over the time. In this particular picture, Veronica is the one on the back row. Other key partners that are represented in this picture are Centro Tyrone Guzman, which is a social service agency. I should say that Veronica is the medical director of a Latinx serving clinic called Aquí Para Ti in the Hennepin Health System. And also represented there are University of Minnesota Extension partners. So this is a timeline visual just to give you an idea of how those 11 years have played out from our infancy to our maturity period where we are now. And during those early developmental stages, we were engaging with each other. We were developing a pilot and implementing a pilot and then understanding the results from that. And then we went on to submit our first NIH grant. We implemented that 5-year multi-site randomized controlled trial. And then since that time, I've had a small dissemination grant and have been working on next grant applications. So I'm going to now walk you through each of the stages and just kind of tell you a little bit about what was happening within our partnership in each of these stages. And talk about some tensions a little bit, but as I mentioned, we'll get into that more in the webinar. So the partnership task for the infancy stage is really to develop trust and security between all of the participants in the partnership and optimism about the collaboration. So during this stage, Veronica and I first met to talk about common interests. We'd both been working with Latino parents, she from her clinical perspective, me from a research perspective. And we were still at that stage sort of trying to come together. She and I had a pretty strong sense that we were going to be able to find some common ground. Our interests overlapped a lot. But we were in the process of identifying partners. So there was no funding at that point. It was a series of conversations, identifying our common interests and what might work, and then developing some trust and security in the partnership and exploring what that meant, not only from Veronica and I, but for other members, particularly of Aquí Para Ti, where there was quite a bit of distrust about research. So this is a quote I'm going to read quickly from one of the community partners in Aquí Para Ti. At the beginning, I was totally suspicious about the you and Michelle's intentions because the long tradition of the academic world to evaluate communities and run away without building something meaningful for that community. I started to see you all meeting on Fridays here at the clinic, and later on I heard Bibiana saying great things about the Parent Advisory Board and how involved, engaged, and insightful the parents were during those meetings. So little by little I became curious about the process, and by the time the pilot session started, I was totally convinced that a real collaboration between the academic and community world was happening. So just a couple of highlights from that. So this was a team member, and speaking about Bibiana, another team member, and really sort of what brought this person into the process was our commitment to involve parent voices in the development of our curriculum. So that, again, sort of walking the walk, not just talking the talk, but really sort of showing that commitment to having community at the center of what we were developing was what sort of allowed this team member to develop trust in the process. So at the next stage was the toddler stage, which again is about developing ways to respect the individual and the organization, their autonomy within the partnership while building our work together. And some of the activities that we were doing is applying for pilot funding at that point, really solidifying the team and who we needed to round out the team, defining our roles, establishing our expectations, and designing the project. So I had somewhat independently applied for a career development award, which I received, but it didn't fund the entire project. So there continued to be this tension between, at that point, I had funding to support my time on the project, and the community partners did not. So we recognized a need for kind of applied expertise in parenting, and so connected with Extension. And then we came together to apply for a small pilot grant. And through that process, each of the partners' expertise came more clearly into focus. We discussed roles, who would be paid, how they would be paid, and really collaborated on the budget process, but we still, hadn't quite formalized our partnership and how we were going to work together in the long term. So at this point, I would just like to sort of share a tool that I believe you all may have used at some point in talking about developing your partnerships. It's one I developed with Kathleen Call and some other partners to prompt early conversations. So it's a checklist that really allows different partners to bring their own perspectives into the conversation around data sharing, around communication expectations, around how you're going to make decisions together, and then formalize those, talk about the differences that you each came up with as you went through the tool, and make sure that everyone is on the same page moving forward. So if you haven't seen that tool, it can be something that can help at these early trust building stages to get everyone on the same page and avoid unnecessary conflict. And it's available on the Program on Health Disparities Research website. So at the preschool stage, we're about broadening skills through a common project, cooperating well within the group. So at this point in Padres Informados, we had pilot funding. Vero and I served as co-PIs on that. And there was synchrony within the group in terms of how we operated, though we didn't discuss it explicitly. So we didn't have the checklist at that point. We didn't go through that. And we sort of somewhat organically developed a consensus model of decision making. And I think because we had some of those sort of early examples of how we developed trust and sort of how our actions were really conveying some behaviors that allowed community partners to trust in the process. We maybe didn't have to have those conversations as explicitly, but this very easily, could have not been successful. So we really used this community-driven process, as I mentioned earlier, with a parent advisory board to develop our curriculum. And we conducted focus groups to generate more community information. And then we really carried out this underfunded pilot. It really took a commitment on the part of all the organizations, but a point of tension. There was a couple of points of tension that came up. One was that we had a disagreement not a disagreement, but a misunderstanding about a position that we had written into the grant. And I'll read a community comment about that momentarily. But that there was a general sense that the community was committing more time than what they were paid for. So that became something that we became aware of very quickly, and something that was had to be talked about and really had to be thought about in terms of what's happening now, what might happen next, and what might future grants mean for funding. So this is, again, one of the Exploriding team members. So at the very beginning, we partnered together for a grant that was submitted by the university. We agreed to include funding for a person to work with Exploriding parents. However, when the grant was awarded, we found out that the funding for the APT position was not there. We got very upset. We addressed this with Michelle, and she faced the situation immediately and came to talk to us. She explained the reasons why the position was not there and apologized about the misunderstanding. After this episode, we were a little skeptical, but through our following interactions, Michelle demonstrated her commitment to our partnership and sincere intentions in advocating for the well-being of our program and community. So again, this was something where we sort of skipped a couple of those key steps and really making sure that we had community involved at all steps of conversation about putting the budget together. That just skipping, one point where we had to make decisions about budget cuts and how we had to reframe a position to sort of do both things really ended up contributing to this pretty significant misunderstanding. I think that really speaks to the importance of communication and the importance of, in that power sharing, really walking hand in hand through the budget process as you're developing grants and then as you're running the grants. So at the school age stage, the partnership task is to increase competence in the performance of project activities and to formalize teamwork. So at this point, we had completed our pilot grant and we were preparing for expanded funding. We brought in and formalized a little bit. Centro Tyrone Guzman had been one of our sites for our pilot, and we really brought them in more formally into the partnership at that stage. And we realized as we were sort of expanding, we had to go back to those early foundational stages, build trust again, and really think about in a little bit more structured way with more groups and more people involved about how we were going to work together. So we negotiated sharing data, we negotiated how we were going to approach publications, and we came up with a collaborative agreement. So at that point, we used the checklist to go through our understandings on some of those key areas of potential conflict, made sure we were aligned on goals, made sure we were aligned about how we were going to make decisions, and then from those conversations wrote a collaborative agreement, which is sometimes called a memorandum of understanding. We also wrote a data sharing agreement and a publication agreement. So this is just a screenshot of what our collaborative agreement starts out to look like. So it starts out with what is our shared goal. And the goal was more than just about research. The goal was about benefit in the community. And I think that really has driven everything that we've done. So Adolescence, the partnership tasks is to develop an identity for the partnership and a set of ideas on which to base our future work. And so at this stage, we were really sort of had applied and had some initial, I think we knew that we were receiving our NIH funding. And so we had a little bit of opportunity to kind of regroup as we were preparing for that grant. And one of the things we thought it was important to do as we sort of brought more people and more groups into the study was to solidify our identity. So from a researcher's perspective, you need small seed grants to kind of get the research going. From the partnership perspective, you need those successes to motivate the group, to solidify our identity, and that pride of participants in the pilot was contagious for the larger research team. Seeing the research results and some of our early positive outcomes from the pilot really kind of fueled that enthusiasm for what we were doing together, and was validating these perspectives that came out of the community. So to sort of solidify that identity, we hired a Latina PR consultant, media consultant, who worked with us to create our name treatment and to make our curricula more visually appealing. So even then, we were and continue to sort of negotiate our collaboration issues that somewhat were around the tensions between research and kind of community priorities. So I think one of the big pieces from a research perspective in that was that we had agreed in our pilot grant to not randomize because we needed to develop that trust, both with our core partners and with the organizations we were doing with. And we needed to build understanding of the research process and what that looked like. So what that led to, and what some of this enthusiasm about the results led to, and the understanding of what we could answer and couldn't answer because of our design, really allowed us to go on to this next larger study with a design that included a delayed control condition. So it was about, so we did randomize at that point. So just one more quote. I think it was very valuable hearing parents talk about their experiences. They felt their opinions were respected, had been incorporated in their curriculum, and the final presentation sort of back from the pilot grant was at Centro for everyone, and it was great. That celebration piece was very important. So in young adulthood, it's about solidifying the bond within a growing partnership. We, during that stage, initiated our 5-year NIH-funded study, and we were also kind of replicating knowledge and expanding it to new partners. So we had 5 new partners that we brought in, 5 additional sites that were sites for this large trial, and we were working with them in a participatory manner too. So they included a school, clinic, social service agency, and a rural extension site. So that geography changed a little bit how the group worked. That differing levels of experience with research changed how the group worked, and the differing levels of expertise and sort of capacity for doing parent education work also changed the way that the group worked. So really we had to, again, go back to the bottom foundational levels of the pyramid to go back to building trust, building capacity, and sort of moving up the progression of partnership stages. Again, although that foundational trust was there and supported the work and made it a lot easier. So what we what we found at that stage is that really, with the expanded group being much more explicit about our partnership principles, being very transparent in our communication, again, sort of really relying on formalizing a lot of those processes and then clearly conveying that to this expanded group of partners became important. And then we all, I would not call it a conflict, but I would call it a tension. You know, our sort of inclination was to bring all these new partners in at the same level and the same depth of participation. And we supported them financially to do that. But the fact of the matter is they were not all engaged at the research level in the same way. And some of them really just wanted the program. They saw the program as beneficial. They wanted to participate in terms of organizing the program, but they really, and bringing that to the parents, but they really didn't want to collaborate at the same depth. And so we had to work with that and understand that that was acceptable, that met their needs, and just continue to be open in our communication with them. So in adulthood, the task is to produce creative and meaningful work and share lessons learned with others. So this represents the final years of our NIH study. And then the tasks of sharing back the work we did, disseminating it to the participants, to the participating organizations, to other key stakeholders, as well as academic dissemination, and then supporting others through training, through consultation in earlier stages of partnership development. So this is the stage where we began to be recognized as experts, both in terms of partnership longevity and experience and the knowledge that we had generated through the scientific part of our partnership. So we began to formally plan for dissemination, and we discussed that from the beginning, but it became more and more concrete moving into this stage of the partnership. And we really talk about efficacy, the efficacy of the study, the efficacy of our outcomes, as well as the efficacy of our partnership. So all of that sort of came to maturity in this adult stage. And now we are solidly in the maturity stage. So our partnership task at this point is to view the achievements of the partnership with satisfaction. And we received a small dissemination grant that allowed us to build a website and to work with local agencies and organizations that may want to use the curriculum. And that was a process, again, of rethinking both our partnership principles and our and what we've learned through the science. In some cases, these new partners that we talked to, or potential partners that we talked to, said, yes, we would like to use the whole evidence-based curricula. Others said, there's some pieces that I could use in my work with parents, but I'm really not, we don't have the capacity to do all 8 sessions. So, and we've also then taken what we've learned, both in terms of partnerships and the contribution of partnerships within large clinical trials, and what we've learned about our project and the benefits of our parent training curricula, and we are have written and have under review for the second time a new grant to adapt our program to primary care, and this has involved bringing in a new set of partners. This has involved sort of expanding our focus in new ways and thinking about how do we within primary care deliver this curriculum in a way that's meaningful for youth, for parents, and that's feasible and sustainable as well as meaningful for primary care clinics serving Latino families. So there's been new tensions within that. In addition, we've had a number of those partners that you've seen in pictures move into new roles. Some of them were graduate students and have continued to work with us, but have left Minnesota where we're located. And so, and want to continue to work with us or want to think about ways that they can use the curriculum in the places where they've moved. So that's generated some new tensions. Who is the core collective? What does it mean to be that core collective? How do we sustain that core collective between grants at the same time that we really share this curriculum and this process that we believe has broad benefit with the community, for the community? So overall, our lessons learned have been really that we have gelled, we have stayed together and continue to work together for 11 years because we keep community benefit at the forefront of the work. So that keeps the legitimacy on the community side. It keeps the scientific frame sort of on my side, and really has what drives our work together. So we also learned that achieving the tasks at each stage of development were necessary for later success. And at points of growth and transformation, we really had to come back, reassess, rebuild, readdress those foundational issues of trust, power sharing, and sort of processes for how we're going to work together. The attentions to the principles of participatory research, maybe not formalized, but probably better when they're formalized, have allowed us to conduct the work day to day in a fashion that builds trust and achieves the tasks of the project. And overall, we've learned that some of those conflicts and tension points can actually propel growth. So as a quick example, we recently, as we were sorting through some of these issues of maturity and who is in the collective, what does the collective look like, and what are our goals, we've gone back to working with a consultant to help us walk through some of these issues. And I'm sure we'll be successful as we work through these, and then that will really allow us an entirely new platform for how we're going to work together. So what we would like you to do is, prior to our conversation at the webinar, identify the stage that you each believe your partnership is in and discuss these questions with your research partner. So do you agree on the stage? It's possible that within a partnership, people don't agree, and why or why not? And what tools did you use at each stage? What did you find helped you to move to that next level? And how well did they work for you? And what challenges do you anticipate at future stages? And are there any other lessons learned? And then discuss any conflicts you've had. We're human beings. We all have them. Maybe they've been stated, maybe they haven't. This could be an opportunity to raise some of these issues together. And were they the same at each stage, or were they different? And were there negative outcomes? If so, what were they? And were there positive outcomes? And can you reflect on those? So we thank you for your attention today, and we'll look forward to our conversation coming up in a couple weeks. Thank you.